It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong. And it didn't stay contained. What first surfaced as a quiet concern quickly escalated into a controlled but deeply serious discussion, one that now threatened to redraw boundaries no one expected to see. Challenged. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the meeting itself was treated as routine, just another closed-door briefing in a palace that thrives on discretion. But those who were present understood immediately that this was different. The tone was sharper, the language more precise. Discussions did not drift, they focused, narrowing in on a single issue that carried far more weight than anyone anticipated. It was not about public duty or ceremonial obligations. It was about something far more sensitive, something deeply personal, yet inseparable from the responsibilities that define the monarchy itself. The subject, insiders suggest, revolved around protocols, rules that exist not in official documents, but in the unspoken understanding that governs royal life. These are the boundaries that rarely need to be enforced, because they are rarely tested. Yet here they were, being examined with an intensity that signaled a shift. Safeguarding, supervision, trust words that are usually background considerations, suddenly took center stage. And with them came a realization that something within the established balance had changed. Catherine's role in that moment was unmistakable. Composed, measured, but resolute. This was not hesitation, it was clarity. She was not reacting impulsively, but responding to something that had been building, quietly, over time. Her stance, as described by those familiar with the discussion, was firm to the point of being unyielding. There would be no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The decision, whatever its full scope, was grounded in a principle that could not be compromised. Beside her, William's presence reinforced that position. There was no visible disagreement, no indication of uncertainty. Instead, there was alignment, silent, but absolute. It sent a message that extended beyond the room itself, one that suggested this was not a singular viewpoint, but a unified approach at the highest level. And within that unity, the significance of the moment deepened. This was no longer a discussion, it was a turning point. What made it even more compelling was the undercurrent that surrounded it. This was not an isolated issue. It carried echoes of past tensions, of moments that had never fully settled. Trust, once assumed, had become something that required careful consideration. And that shift, subtle but profound, changed everything. Because within the monarchy, trust is not just personal, it is structural. When it is questioned, even quietly, the response is never casual. As details began to circulate in fragments never fully confirmed, never officially acknowledged, the picture that emerged was one of careful control. A decision made not out of emotion, but out of necessity. A boundary drawn not to create division, but to define it. And yet, for all its precision, the implications were far-reaching. Because decisions like this do not exist in isolation. They ripple outward, reshaping relationships, redefining expectations, and altering the balance that once felt stable. And so, what began as a quiet conversation evolved into something far more significant. Not loud, not public, but deeply consequential. Because what appeared to be a simple precaution soon revealed something far more complex, one rooted in trust, history, and decisions that could no longer be ignored. Within the monarchy, there are rules that are written, and then there are rules that are simply understood. The latter are rarely spoken, but always followed. They govern trust, proximity, and access, especially when it comes to the youngest members of the royal family. And now those unspoken rules were being brought into the light, not as tradition, but as enforcement. For generations, these quiet understandings have shaped how relationships function behind palace walls. They are not documented, not announced, yet they carry the weight of expectation that few dare to challenge. Especially when children are involved, the boundaries become even more delicate, more guarded. Because within the royal structure, safeguarding is not just a personal priority, it is an institutional necessity. The future of the monarchy rests in those young lives, and every decision surrounding them is filtered through that reality. Trust, in this context, is not assumed, it is measured. It is built over time, reinforced through consistency, and maintained through actions that align with the standards the institution demands. And when that trust is tested, even subtly, the response is never immediate, but it is always deliberate. Access, once fluid and informal, can become structured without warning. Proximity, once natural, can be redefined through quiet decisions that carry far-reaching implications. And it is within that transformation that the true power of these unwritten rules begins to reveal itself. Supervision, a word that might seem simple on the surface, takes on a far more complex meaning within this environment. It is not just about presence, it is about assurance. It reflects a need to maintain control, to ensure that interactions align with expectations that are rarely explained but always enforced. And when supervision becomes a focal point, it signals something deeper, a shift from comfort to caution, from familiarity to formality. It is a line drawn not out of conflict, but out of necessity, shaped by circumstances that demand clarity where ambiguity once existed. This is not without precedent. There have been moments in the past where protocol quietly stepped in to guide decisions that could not be left to personal interpretation. Situations where relationships, no matter how close, were adjusted to align with broader responsibilities. These moments rarely reached the public eye, but within the institution, they were understood as part of the balance between family and duty. And now, that balance was being recalibrated once again. Not in reaction, but in recognition of something that had shifted beneath the surface. What makes this moment particularly significant is the transition from informal understanding to formal boundary. Once something becomes defined, it changes the dynamic entirely. It moves from being a quiet expectation to an established rule, one that cannot easily be reversed or ignored. And in doing so, it reshapes not just individual interactions, but the structure of relationships themselves. The ease that once existed is replaced with precision, the flexibility with certainty. And with that certainty comes consequence. Because within the monarchy, boundaries are never drawn lightly. They are considered, weighed, and ultimately enforced with a level of seriousness that reflects their importance. And when such a boundary is put in place, it is rarely about a single moment. It is about a pattern, a culmination of factors that lead to a decision that cannot be undone without consequence. And as those boundaries became clearer, attention inevitably turned to what had triggered such a decisive response in the first place. Tensions within the royal family are rarely visible in real time, but they are always present, quietly shaping decisions long before they reach the surface. What the public sees as distance or silence often masks deeper fractures, ones built over time through moments that never fully resolved. And now, those fractures appeared to be influencing decisions in ways that could no longer be concealed. For years, the relationship between Harry and the rest of the royal family has been described in fragments, headlines, interviews, carefully worded statements that only ever revealed part of the story. But behind those fragments lay something far more complex. Moments that seemed isolated at the time began to form a pattern when viewed together. Conversations that ended without closure, actions that carried consequences long after they were taken, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a gap began to widen not just in distance, but in understanding. Concerns, insiders suggest, were not born from a single incident but from accumulation. Each public disclosure, each unexpected revelation added another layer to an already delicate dynamic. Trust, once assumed as a given within the family, became something that required reassessment. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, quietly. And with each reassessment, the foundation that once supported open interaction began to shift. Within internal discussions, that shift became increasingly difficult to ignore. Trust was no longer a background assumption, it became a central topic. Not because it had disappeared entirely, but because it could no longer be taken for granted. And in an institution where trust underpins everything from personal relationships to public responsibility, that change carried significant weight. It influenced how decisions were made, how interactions were approached, and ultimately, how boundaries were defined. But what made the situation particularly challenging was its emotional complexity. This was not simply a matter of protocol or procedure. It was family, shared history, personal bonds that do not disappear even when strained. And within that space, the line between duty and emotion becomes increasingly difficult to navigate. Every decision carries two dimensions, the personal and the institutional, and rarely do they align perfectly. It is within that tension that the most difficult choices are made. Catherine's role within this dynamic became especially significant. Positioned at the intersection of responsibility and empathy, she was required to navigate a path that balanced both. Her approach, as suggested by those familiar with the situation, was not reactive, but considered. She was not addressing a single moment, but responding to a pattern that had been building over time. And in doing so, she carried the weight of ensuring that any decision made would reflect not just immediate concerns, but long-term stability. Those close to the situation have suggested that what unfolded was never sudden. It was cumulative, a series of moments, each contributing to a larger realization that something within the dynamic had fundamentally changed. And once that realization took hold, it could not be ignored. The response, when it came, was not impulsive, it was inevitable. A decision shaped by time, by experience, and by a growing understanding that certain lines, once crossed, require clear definition moving forward. And in that realization lies the turning point. Because tension alone does not create action, it is the moment when concern turns into decision that changes everything. There are moments when hesitation is no longer an option, when a decision must be made, regardless of how it may be perceived. For Catherine, this was one of those moments. Quiet, composed, but undeniably firm, she drew a line that could not be crossed, not out of conflict, but out of conviction. What made this moment so significant was not the visibility of the decision, but the clarity behind it. Catherine was not stepping into unfamiliar territory, she was stepping into responsibility that had been building over time. Every concern, every discussion, every quiet reassessment had led to this point. And when that point arrived, there was no room for uncertainty. Her role was not simply to respond, but to define, to establish a boundary that reflected not only her judgment, but the expectations of the institution she represents. Safeguarding, in this context, became more than a principle, it became a priority that guided every aspect of her approach. It was not about reaction, but about prevention, about ensuring that the structure surrounding the youngest members of the royal family remained intact, regardless of external pressures. This was not a decision made lightly, nor was it driven by a single moment. It was shaped by a broader understanding that responsibility, when it comes to protecting the future, must always come before comfort. And that understanding carried a weight that could not be ignored. Yet beneath that clarity was an undeniable emotional complexity. This was not a distant or impersonal choice, it was deeply rooted in family dynamics. Every boundary drawn carried the echo of personal connection, of shared history that does not simply disappear when circumstances change. And within that space, the difficulty of the decision becomes more apparent. Because it is one thing to act within the framework of duty, it is another to do so when that framework intersects with relationships that are inherently personal. Catherine's strength in that moment was not in detachment, but in her ability to hold both realities at once without allowing one to compromise the other. William's presence beside her reinforced that balance. There was no visible division, no hesitation in his support. Instead, there was alignment quiet, steady, and unmistakable. It sent a message that extended beyond the immediate situation, one that spoke to the unity at the core of their roles. This was not an individual stance, it was a shared position, grounded in a mutual understanding of what was required. And in that unity, the decision gained strength, becoming not just a response, but a standard. The implications of that standard were immediate, even if not publicly acknowledged. It signaled a shift in how internal matters would be handled moving forward, less reliant on informal understanding, more defined by structured protocol. What had once been guided by assumption would now be shaped by clarity, and that clarity, while necessary, carried consequences. Because once a boundary is defined, it changes the dynamic entirely. It establishes expectations that cannot easily be undone, and it reshapes relationships in ways that extend far beyond the moment in which it was created. This was not about control, it was about stability, about ensuring that the framework of the monarchy remained secure even when faced with challenges that tested its limits. And in taking that step, Catherine was not just responding to a situation, she was reinforcing a principle that would continue to influence decisions long after this moment had passed. And once that line was drawn, the implications began to ripple far beyond the immediate situation. For Harry, the shift was impossible to ignore. What had once been informal became defined. What had once been assumed became restricted. And in that transition, a deeper reality began to take shape, one that spoke not just of distance, but of boundaries that were no longer negotiable. At first, the change may have felt subtle, almost procedural, the kind of adjustment that could be explained away as timing, circumstance, or simple coordination. But over time, the pattern became clearer. Interactions that once happened naturally now carried conditions. Access that had once been open now required structure. And within that structure, a message began to form, one that did not need to be spoken to be understood. Something had shifted, and it was not temporary. For someone who had once moved within the royal family without hesitation, the contrast would have been unmistakable. Familiarity had been replaced with formality. Moments that once relied on trust now depended on oversight. And while those changes may have appeared measured from the outside, their impact was far more profound. Because within a family, especially one bound by both blood and institution, even the smallest adjustment can carry emotional weight far beyond its surface meaning. The symbolic nature of that shift was impossible to ignore. It was not simply about logistics or arrangement, it was about position. About where one stands within a structure that balances personal relationships with public responsibility. And as those positions evolve, so too does the meaning behind every interaction. What was once taken for granted becomes redefined, not necessarily as rejection, but as recalibration. A realignment that reflects not just present concerns, but accumulated experience. Within the broader dynamics of the monarchy, this change spoke to something larger than a single relationship. It reflected a system that had begun to prioritize clarity over assumption, structure over familiarity. The informal spaces that once allowed for flexibility were narrowing, replaced by defined expectations that left little room for interpretation. And in that shift, the contrast between past and present became more pronounced. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the present demanded something different. Insiders have suggested that this evolution was not sudden, but gradual, a separation that had been forming over time, shaped by choices, circumstances, and moments that altered. Perception. Roles that once overlapped began to diverge. Relationships that once operated freely began to carry conditions. And while the connection itself may not have vanished, the way it functioned had undeniably changed. It was no longer just about who belonged, it was about how that belonging was expressed within the boundaries that had now been established. What made the situation particularly powerful was its quietness. There were no public declarations, no explicit confirmations, and yet the message was clear. Boundaries, once invisible, had been drawn with precision, and in doing so, they communicated something far more significant than words ever could. They defined expectation, they set limits, they reinforced a structure that would not easily bend, regardless of personal history or emotional complexity. Because ultimately, this was not about exclusion, it was about definition, about establishing a framework that could withstand pressure without losing its integrity. And for Harry, that framework represented a reality that could no longer be overlooked, one that carried both personal and symbolic weight as it continued to unfold. But this was never just about one relationship, it was about what the monarchy itself was choosing to protect. At its core, the monarchy is not just a family, it is an institution built on continuity, responsibility, and preservation. And when those elements feel threatened, even subtly, the response is rarely immediate, but always decisive. What unfolded here was not reaction, it was protection. For generations, the survival of the monarchy has depended on its ability to think beyond the present moment. Every decision, no matter how personal it may appear, is weighed against a larger question: what does this mean for the future? That question has shaped actions in ways the public rarely sees, guiding choices that often place responsibility above emotion. And in moments like this, that guiding principle becomes even more pronounced. Because when uncertainty begins to touch the edges of stability, the institution does not wait for crisis, it moves to prevent it. Safeguarding the future is not simply about preserving tradition, it is about protecting the individuals who will carry that tradition forward. The younger members of the royal family are not just children within a household, they represent continuity itself. Their environment, their experiences, the structures surrounding them, all of it is carefully considered. And when adjustments are made, they are not arbitrary. They reflect a deeper awareness that even small vulnerabilities, if left unaddressed, can grow into larger challenges over time. This is where the role of senior royals becomes critical. They are not just participants in the system, they are its stabilizers. Their responsibility extends beyond personal relationships into the maintenance of an institution that must remain steady, even when internal dynamics become complicated. And in fulfilling that responsibility, they are often required to make decisions that do not align neatly with emotion. It is a burden that comes with position, a constant balancing act between what is felt and what is required. That balance is rarely comfortable. Personal bonds do not disappear simply because responsibility demands distance. The emotional weight of such decisions lingers, shaping the experience of those involved in ways that are not always visible. Yet within the monarchy, there is an understanding that duty does not wait for resolution. It moves forward, guided by the need to preserve something larger than any single relationship. And in doing so, it creates a framework that prioritizes stability, even when that stability comes at a personal cost. What makes this moment particularly telling is how it reflects a broader pattern, one that emerges during periods of uncertainty. When the structure feels pressure, boundaries tend to become clearer, more defined. Informal understandings give way to formal expectations. Flexibility is replaced by precision. Not because the institution is rigid, but because it recognizes the need for clarity when navigating complex situations. And that clarity, once established, reinforces the foundation upon which everything else depends. Within that framework, every decision carries meaning beyond its immediate impact. It signals priorities, it defines limits, it communicates, without words, what the institution values most. And in this case, the message was unmistakable. The future, its stability, its continuity, its protection, remains the central focus, even when achieving that focus requires difficult choices that reshape existing dynamics. And in that balance, a deeper question began to emerge: what does this mean for the future of these relationships? Families are defined not just by connection, but by the boundaries they choose to uphold. And within the royal family, those boundaries carry a weight that extends far beyond personal emotion. What was once flexible had now become fixed, reshaping dynamics in ways that could not easily be reversed. Relationships that once relied on instinct and familiarity were now being reframed through structure and expectation, not because the bond had weakened, but because the circumstances surrounding it had changed. And in that change, a new reality began to take shape, one where connection still existed, but operated within limits that could no longer be ignored. The evolution of those relationships did not happen suddenly. It unfolded over time, shaped by decisions, experiences, and moments that altered how trust was understood within the family. Boundaries, once invisible, became defined. Roles, once fluid, became more precise. And with that precision came a shift in expectation. What was once accepted without question now required careful consideration. It was not a rejection of the past, but a recalibration of the present. One that reflected the complexities of balancing tradition with the demands of a changing world. That balance, however, came with emotional consequence. Distance, even when necessary, carries weight. It reshapes interactions, alters familiarity, and introduces a formality that can feel at odds with the idea of family itself. Yet within the monarchy, that contrast has always existed, the tension between personal connection and institutional responsibility. And in moments like this, that tension becomes more visible, revealing just how difficult it is to maintain both without compromise. What makes this shift particularly significant is how it highlights the ongoing challenge of adapting tradition to modern realities. The monarchy is built on continuity, yet it exists within a world that is constantly evolving. And as those two forces meet, adjustments become inevitable. Boundaries are not just enforced, they are refined, shaped to reflect both the past and the present. And in doing so, they redefine not just relationships, but the structure that supports them. Over time, what once felt restrictive begins to take on a different meaning. Structured interactions, though initially difficult, become part of a new normal. Acceptance grows, not out of comfort, but out of understanding. The recognition that these changes, however challenging, are part of a larger effort to maintain stability in an environment where every decision carries consequence. And in that recognition, the idea of unity is redefined not as closeness without limits, but as connection that endures within them. In the absence of public statements, silence becomes its own form of communication. No confirmations, no denials, just a series of decisions that speak louder than any words ever could. And in that silence, the reality of what has changed becomes impossible to ignore. The lack of explanation does not diminish the impact, it amplifies it. Because when nothing is said, every action becomes more significant, every adjustment more noticeable. And the public, left without clarity, begins to interpret the silence as a message in itself. That silence has long been one of the monarchy's most powerful tools. It allows decisions to stand on their own, without the need for justification or elaboration. But it also shapes perception, creating space for speculation, interpretation, and sometimes misunderstanding. And yet, within the institution, the meaning remains clear. Quiet decisions are not accidental, they are deliberate. They are designed to communicate without confrontation, to establish boundaries without escalating conflict. Because in the end, the absence of words does not mean the absence of meaning. It means the opposite. It means that what has been decided is strong enough to stand without explanation. And as those boundaries settle into place, their true significance begins to take on a new meaning, revealing that sometimes the most powerful decisions are the ones never fully explained, but always deeply felt. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.